Good morning and welcome to my channel, The Fruitcake Astrologer, where I will give you an astrologer's take on current events and people in the news. So it is now August 17th, and so begins the Democratic National Convention. It looks like Biden is going to be the nominee. For those of you who are Biden supporters, unfortunately I have some negative stuff to say about the guy. If you don't want to listen, that's fine. Sorry about that, guys. Now you're like, oh, you're a Republican, and it's like, no, I could care less about if someone is Republican or Democrat. I vote based upon someone's natal chart, and we're given two people. Now, politics is big business, right? They tell them how to stand, what to say. They poll, say more of that. That polls well. Say less of that. Who the heck are these people really? And so that is what I'm doing is like, civic, just take a look at these guys' natal chart and, see what's really going on there, see what's under the lid. Now, I will also take a brief look at Kamala's chart at the end of this reading. Hers is much more fortunate. She also has some difficult stuff, but hers is much more fortunate. Okay, so for me, here's his chart. For me, the questions I have about Joe, and you may have other ones, but for me, is Joe really creepy Joe? Now, that has really disappeared from the mainstream media. His Wikipedia page has been very much scrubbed. Now, there's much talk about him not having, him having health issues, that he will drop out of the race, that he will be replaced. So I'm wondering, how is Joe's health? Is he looking okay? Can he stand up? These are my questions. Can he stand up to the rigors of the presidency? Now, I'm in my 60s, and I don't know how many guys I've watched go in there with, dark hair and come out gray-haired on the other side. So I think it really is a lot of responsibility. Now, let's see. The third question I have about Joe, is he corrupt? Of course, the Burisma scandal, right, where he pretty much, he actually did say in his own words that it was quid pro quo, and he, called that prosecutor off on his son who had just been kicked out of the Navy for drugs and is now pulling down a massive salary. So is Joe corrupt, or isn't he corrupt? Okay, so those are just questions I want answered. I mean, you guys may have more, but for me, that's what I want to know. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, whenever I pull up somebody's chart, usually something will jump out at me, and any astrologer is going to see that pile up, or what we call a stellium, in the 12th house in Scorpio. And right there, I'm sorry to say, guys, I would have a very difficult time voting for anybody with a stellium in the 12th house in Scorpio. I'm just saying, I would have a terrible time voting for someone like that. So we'll come back to that 12th house stellium, but I usually like to start with what we call the big three, which is sets a person's temperament. So Joe is Sag rising, which is very nice. And he has his sun in Scorpio in the 12th house and his moon in Taurus in the 5th. So right off the bat, we get that Joe's going to be likable. Sagittarius rising people. Sag is ruled by the greater beneficent Jupiter. We see Jupiter is retrograde in his 8th house in Cancer. Interestingly enough, Trump also has Jupiter stationing direct on the date of his birth. So they both have Jupiter stations in retrograde. Jupiter stationing direct, of course, is more favorable than being born with Jupiter retrograde, right? But it makes him likable, right? He's got Venus widely conjunct the ascendant. He's going to be attractive. Venus conjunct the ascendant or the midheaven typically makes someone attractive. But you'll notice that Venus is at the late stages of Scorpio, the stinger. And I think his good looks have stung him. And we'll get into that as well later. Okay, so he's loyal. And man, look at that pile up in Scorpio, trining Pluto. Wow, this guy can keep a secret. Dang, okay. We see Scorpio so prevalent in this chart. Let's talk a little bit about Scorpio now. Scorpio rules death. And the second thing I notice when I look at this chart is how much pain this man has endured. And I'm sometimes left wondering why God makes someone endure such pain on a public stage. And I remember back in, I guess it was March or something, when I was looking, I thought, this guy's going to regret running for president. And to me, he just looks increasingly frail. So I think the pressures of this are, wearing on the guy, right? So Scorpio, like I said, Scorpio rules death, taxes, power. And I just segue into, if you start looking at politicians' charts, you are going to see Pluto all over the place. For those of you who haven't watched Trump's natal chart, Trump has an out-of-bounds Pluto, and it's without aspect. So his Pluto's off the chart. So, and look at Biden's. Holy smokes. Biden's got a stellium trined by Pluto, and Pluto owns that Scorpio stellium. So another really strong Pluto. So you got to ask yourself, why do politicians put up with this? I mean, look at what happens to you and your family when you go into public life. You are constantly belittled and criticized. I mean, they even go after your friends and your family. Who in the world would want that? Well, people with a strong Scorpio, they are all about power. That's what drives them. That's their energy. That's what they love, right? I could, another person with a stellium in Scorpio is Nancy Pelosi. Another one with an out-of-bounds Pluto is Elizabeth Warren. Kamala Harris, which I'll get into later, it has Pluto conjunct Venus, which is power brokering. Venus is how we relate to people, and Pluto is power. You'll see that over and over in the charts of politicians. So what we know is that they love power. So loyal, stable. I get stable with the moon and sun in the fixed signs of Scorpio and Taurus. And, likable and attractive. That's what I see, when I look at Biden's, just a quick glance, right? Now, Jupiter rising people, Sag ascendants, tend to have what they call the hoof and mouth disease. I mean, they're all about truth, right? They just say whatever's on their mind. So that's why they have hoof and mouth disease, because they stick their foot in their mouth all the time. But they're so likable that, people tend to look the other way. They're funny. People really like being around them. They're generous. And based on that, now it is widely trine the ascendant. I think Joe really did start out wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be just. I really do think he did. And of course, he's been in politics for gazillions of years. And if I could just say what I think his genius is in the political world, is he knows how the wealthy and powerful work behind the scenes, right? Pluto in Leo. Leo is important, powerful people. Trining that big pile up in his 12th house of secrets. In the sign of Scorpio, he knows how the big guys work. He knows the way they work, and he can keep a secret. And he's loyal, and I think that is his political genius. Let's talk his mother and his father, okay? Looks like we'll start with the nice parent, Mom. Mom looks to have been his rock, moon in Taurus, and I believe Taurus is ruled by Venus, and I believe his good looks came from his mother. And it looks like Mom came to really help him, because look at that type trine between the moon and the north node. The north node is karmic, so it would say that they knew each other in another life, and it's the moon is conjunct Fortuna. So I think he got a mother who really helped him, a mother who was there for him, and I think came along to really help him through what I would consider to be an exceptionally difficult incarnation. Dad, on the other hand, looks to be an exceedingly challenging guy. Now, interesting that both Trump's father and Biden's father both came from money, right? Except Biden's father lost it. And so he grew up in, his father was a used car salesman, had a lot of jobs, by all accounts, and I know they've scrubbed the Wikipedia page, but I believe it's still out there, that he grew up in an alcoholic household to the point where he won't allow alcohol in his home because he saw what it did. So look at that Saturn opposing his ascendant. And retrograde, that says dad wasn't there for me. And I tried to get away from him. Opposition. I also think my father brought down the status of the family. Now, Saturn trines Neptune in the 10th. Dad probably was pretty good at spinning a tale. Dad probably taught him that lying, Neptune, will get you ahead in the world, Neptune in the 10th. And of course, last time Biden ran for president, he had to drop out because he was found to have plagiarized the speech of John F. Kennedy and some Scottish guy. And on top of that, he said that he had gone with a full ride to law school and finished at the top of his class, and it turned out he had not had a scholarship and he graduated at the bottom. So after that, he had to drop out. So where did that come from? And I believe that comes from his father was a used car salesman, and he probably heard many a story that sometimes you have to tell, some falsehoods, deceit, deception to get ahead in the world. So the ascendant is what we wish people to see, what we push forth. And Sag rising, nice ascendant, Venus conjunct. But the 10th house is how the world sees us. So he's being seen by a lot of the world as weak. Neptune weakens. He's as having told falsehoods about himself and plagiarizing, and also he was accused of cheating in college and got in trouble for that. So I believe that came from his dad. That his dad taught him how to get ahead that way, of course, which is not good. I believe I can make a really strong case that he will drop out if guys, I have a good time of birth on this guy. Okay, I think he might drop out right before the election. Okay, I'm seeing some stuff, and a lot of astrologers are thinking maybe the elections won't happen on schedule, and that could be one of the reasons why right before election Biden drops out for health reasons. I will at the end of this show you why I think that, and I could be wrong. I mean, we get a symbol, but that's what it's looking like to me. Anyway, okay. Dad difficult. Dad very difficult. Okay. Now, look at how the ascendant arcs up to meet Mars in the 12th house when he's about 8 or 9. Now, you'll see Mars squares Pluto. I believe Joe was molested as a child, and not nicely either. I think it was brutal because Scorpio is brutal. And Pluto square Mars is a very brutal, violent aspect. And I believe that's why he started to stutter at that age, it wasn't great. And I think he's got a lot of rage, pent-up rage about that. He's really angry about it. And I also think that's why Joe is Creepy Joe, is that because of this, he has damaged boundaries. He doesn't realize that it is inappropriate to walk up and, smell someone's hair and, do that kind of creepy stuff. He's got damaged boundaries. Bless his heart, and, I could take a stab at who it was, but that person or persons have since long, I'm sure have passed away by now. So, but what a difficult childhood, So what we're seeing between these two men are exceedingly challenging childhoods. So This, I believe, is why they fall in love with power, is because they had so little of it as a child that they seek it when they get older. Okay, so if that ain't enough pain for you, okay, let me just back up. And why do I think he was sexually molested? Okay, because the two sexual planets, Venus and Mars, are in the 12th house. Mars rules his 5th house of sex. The other sexual house is Scorpio. And Scorpio rules that stellium, and Pluto is trine it. So I mean, I would be floored. And this also says to me that Joe has a secret sex life. I actually, looking at this pile up in Scorpio in the 12th house of self-undoing, I'm floored there aren't more tarot reads. You know, maybe I'm not floored there aren't more tarot reads, because, I mean, look what they do to the women who speak up. And how long did it take? How many women had to speak up before Harvey Weinstein went down? I mean, they even had some, you know, the police had her wear a wire to talk to Harvey Weinstein. They had him on wire and still nothing happened. Harvey owned the press, and they came out and called her a hooker. Said she was an Italian prostitute, and she was a model who was supporting her mother and her younger brother, and lost job. I mean, what? This is what happens to women who speak up. I mean, you got to be a nun, right? So I don't blame them. And your family gets drug into it. I mean, just imagine. I don't blame them for not speaking up, but I would bet money that there are more tarot reads or something's going on behind the scenes with Joe. He's really good at keeping a secret, though. Now, notice that Neptune in the 10th rules his 4th house of home and family. Now, you can interpret that, you know, that he grew up in a substance abuse, escapist household, lots of alcohol. That's the word, is that they were big drinkers in his household. Now, Neptune is disposited by Venus, and Venus is at the later stages of Scorpio, the stinger. So I think that he was an attractive little boy, you know, wasn't so good. Bless his heart. What an awful thing. Before I go in, let's talk about that 12th house stellium. Now, the 12th house, no astrologer ever wants to see anything in the 12th house. It's such a difficult house. It's a house of self-undoing. Really, widowhood, suicide, thievery. It's just a terrible, terrible house. Nobody ever wants to see anything in it. You know, I've heard arguments, maybe Jupiter, you know, because Jupiter means you take your pain and you use it to help other people. I think Tony Robbins is someone with Jupiter in his 12th, and he, you know, his whole shtick is trying to help people. So, okay, maybe Jupiter, but nobody ever wants to see anything in there, because that is where you undo yourself. Now, even worse is that 2 of those 4 planets, Venus and Mercury, rule 2 houses. So it literally says half of his houses, he's busily undoing himself. I think President Obama said something, quote, like, never underestimate Joe's ability to screw things up. I'm paraphrasing. So Joe undoes himself, right? It's just, you know, it's really tragic. So let's just start with Mars. Mars is the first planet. Pluto square Mars, bad anger, you know, bad rage. And he says stuff like, I'm going to go beat people up. I'm going to take them into the woodshed. I'm going to, you know, not the best thing to say, you know. I'm going to go out and beat people up, in my humble opinion. You know, I know Trump is bad too. I get it. But that doesn't make it right in either one's chart, right? Violence is not good. So Mars rules his 5th house of sex, one of the sexual houses. Now, this is the more playful sex. This is romantic sex, you know, but it also rules children. Now, the ruler of his 5th house in the 12th house in Scorpio, he's already had 2 of his children die, really tragically. One was from a brain cancer at an early age. The other one was killed in an auto accident with his wife. So that's, that's like, oh my goodness. And his third of his children has terrible issues, substance abuse issues, and lots of times when I look at politicians to see what kind of person they are, I look at their kids, because that tells me a lot about who they were as parents, right? But I can't fault Joe on Hunter, because Hunter was in that accident with his mother and his sister were killed. And so I would expect, maybe he could have, I would not be shocked that he had issues relating, with that. So we're going to give him a bye on that. But look at how difficult, it is with his kids. And it would also tend to indicate that he was a severe disciplinarian, right? Pluto square Mars. And that, behind the scenes, secretly, 12th house, I think he was probably a very harsh disciplinarian. His 6th and his 11th houses are ruled by Venus, okay? My wife was killed, okay? The ruler of the 7th in the 12th house in Scorpio. And this undid me. So that's, there's more indications of her dying than just having the ruler of your 7th and your 12th, okay? But that is one of the indications of widowhood or widowerhood. His 6th house of health undoes him. Okay, he's had 2 aneurysms at a pretty early age. I believe he was in his mid-40s and had 2 aneurysms. So that's, that's tough. And of course, his health and his mental competency are being called into question right now. That undoes him. Now, the 11th house is also ruled by Venus. I think that his political life has undone him, and his groups that he's associated with undo him. Okay, so he's been strongly associated with the credit card companies out of Delaware. And if you guys know any, about banking, Delaware has a lot of quote unquote money laundering, really loose financial rules out of Delaware. You can look it up. But so his association with large corporations, 11th, groups, is also undo him. I'm pretty sure his relationship with the credit card companies will probably come out. I believe the head of one of the credit card companies there bought his house for him at way over market. Now, the sun is also there. Now, the sun rules the 9th house of religion, foreign things, judgment, justice, and also would tend to indicate he has an ego need for power, right? And that undoes him. Mercury rules 2 houses. The 7th, which we talked about, the ruler of his 7th house of marriage in the 12th house in Scorpio. Classic interpretation is widowhood. And his 10th house, it literally says my desire for power, my desire for status, undoes me. So what it basically says to me, if you want to sum it up, my desire for power, my ego need for power, Scorpio in Leo, trining that stellium in the 12th house of self-undoing, literally has undone me. Now, when I say power, I mean scorpionic things. I mean, Scorpio also rules sex. Maybe some stuff will come out about, more stuff will come out. We haven't hit the October surprise time yet, have we? So, they both got something in their little hip pocket that they're waiting to lay on us, in a few days or a few weeks before the election. It. And I would be surprised if there weren't more women coming out against Joe sexually. So dang, how did a guy with such an unfortunate chart rise to such a position of power? Oh my goodness. I believe, as I said earlier, his genius is because he had to be very charming with an alcoholic childhood. You learn to be manipulative. You learn how to survive. And also, suffering abuse at the hands of abusers. He learned what makes him tick. He learned how to work them. I think that's his genius. And his loyalty. He's very loyal and he can keep a secret. I think that is why Joe has risen to such power. Now, we'll get into his transits in a little bit, but he's basically likable, attractive, and he knows how to work with powerful people. Okay, so we've answered. Is Creepy Joe creepy? I'm thinking he's kind of creepy, and he's just had such a tough childhood. You can't forgive that stuff, but I feel empathy and sympathy for him. I do. Let's see. So, is he corrupt? I would say he started out not so, but I think that, he probably, yes. Okay? And I don't think you have to look very far for that, Everybody's saying he's not mentally competent, that he's not bright. He was not a good student. Like I said, he wasn't good in high school. It wasn't a good student in high school, and he graduated at the bottom of his law school class. But I don't think Joe isn't bright. I think he's a ball of seething emotions. Why do I say that? Because Scorpio is still waters run deep. Scorpio is a water sign. Joe has an exceedingly watery sign, so watery chart. So I think he is a roiling mass of emotions. But they're kept under the lid. Scorpios are really good about figuring out what makes everyone else tick and be very good about people not knowing a thing about them. Very secretive people, very secretive. But look at Uranus in the 6th house opposing that pile up in Scorpio. So that says to me that his emotions, all those roiling emotions that are happening under the lid in secret, are short-circuiting his mind. Uranus retrograde ruling the 3rd house. Now, Uranus associating with the 3rd house is usually someone who's very bright, maybe even a genius. So I think what happens is that all these roiling emotions affect him mentally. I mean, consider having strokes, aneurysms at 46. I mean, his mind is probably working like massive overtime. One of the amazing things that comes out of his chart, at least to me, is how emotional this guy is. He is a seething ball of emotions. And I think, when this presidential campaign started, Joe has visibly aged to me, visibly looks more feeble. I think the reason for that is his head is going like a gazillion miles a minute, and I think, it's affecting his ability to think, right? And speak. Uranus ruling the 3rd house. It's short-circuiting. All these emotions are short-circuiting his ability to think and to speak. So I'm not seeing mental issues, but I am seeing someone whose emotions are really running crazy. Okay. Let's go on and take a look. Now, I did a reading on Trump's summer. Terrible transits this summer, and we just saw that his brother passed away. I'm so sorry. These guys get to play their pain out on the public stage. Ouch. We look at the ephemeris and count forward. Now, this is basically a quick and dirty progression. There is something in the Bible, and don't quote me, I'm not sure I've got this perfect, but it says, "And one day shall be as a year in the life of man." And that's where the predictive technique of progressions comes along. It's from the Bible, and it's exceedingly accurate. So look here, you see that Joe was born with many retrograde planets. But look here, they've started to go direct. Imagine the accomplishment of being able to be the top of the Democratic ticket. How many people did he beat out for that? I don't know. Were there 20-something people who started out in the Democratic field, and he ended up at the top of the ticket? And even more remarkable is the fact that he did poorly in the primaries. Which I find kind of interesting, how Bernie and Buttigieg were winning in the first, 5 primaries, kind of duking it out. Biden didn't do a darn thing. I think he finished no better than 4th or 8th or something. And South Carolina hits, and everybody drops out and plows in behind Biden. I found that really shocking. And I also find it interesting that Kamala Harris also did poorly in the primaries. So my wondering is, how did these two get to the top of the Democratic ticket? I find that interesting, at minimum interesting. But we can see here that Biden was going to have things turn around for him. So when you're out there with your clients, keep an eye on when planets change sign by progression or station direct or retrograde. Those are usually pretty pivotal times in their life. So from what I've seen so far, he does not have the chart to beat President Trump's natal chart. When I was doing Trump's chart, I said I either want an equally exceptional natal chart, or B, that he had such overwhelmingly powerful transits that he could beat a stronger natal chart. And I'm not, so I'm not seeing the natal chart beating him. But let's move on and take a look at Joe's transits coming up to the election. So we'll look at August, September, and October. And I'm going to save the election for a separate reading. But let's see what the rest of Joe's summer's looking like. Now, before I get into deep in this, prediction is very heavily dependent on a good time of birth. Now, I did do my due diligence, and I did change his time of birth to 8:30 and 30 seconds because some of the transit scans I ran to try to against major events in his life seemed to be more accurate. But so, most astrologers kind of shudder a little bit when they see 9 o'clock or 8:30. Do I have a good time of birth? But it seemed, my due diligence seemed okay. So, based on that, let's take a look at Joe's summer. You will note this is the beginning of the DNC. DNC starts August 17th and goes through the 24th. And there's quite a few big transits. He's got the North Node, which takes 28 years roughly to go around the zodiac, in conjuncting the Sun in the 12th. I think what this means is that he will not be attending the convention. He's going to be attending virtually, 12th house. And I think it also implies that this isn't going to help him. The Sun, right, making me look less powerful in conjunct to the Sun. Now, Mars transits tend to annoy us, but it's not the end of the world stuff, okay? Mars in the 5th, squaring Jupiter in the 8th. Does something come out about his kids, 5th house, or something sexual? 5th and 8th house are the sexual houses, and Mars is a sexual planet. Now, this isn't the end of the world stuff. It just kind of harries him, okay? Something maybe will kind of harry him a little bit. Now, Neptune opposes the midheaven. Oh, my goodness. Does this mean he steps down at the end of the conference? I could definitely make a case for this, but it may just mean, I get a symbol that he speaks, Mars third house, remotely, Neptune, at the convention on the closing day, okay? And it doesn't do him any favors. Neptune dissolves. I don't think he's going to step down. I do think he's going to speak remotely. That's what this means. The third, Neptune, he will speak remotely. Now, on August 26th, the moon in the 8th sextiles the midheaven by solar arc. And I believe this indicates that he will accept the nomination and he will go forward. Okay. Now, At the end of the month, more being harried. Where's Joe? Probably, the sun in the 12th. Where's Joe? Joe has been disappearing. Now, I could make a case that it will be someone else and he steps down on the 24th, but I don't think so. Okay, moving on to September. So here's the second reason I don't think Joe will step down at the convention. It's because Saturn stations direct by progression, no less. On the 9th of September, that is a big deal when a planet changes, goes direct by progression. And then Mars stations retrograde on the exact same day. I believe by this time, people are saying Joe needs to start coming out of his basement, so to speak, and he needs to stop dodging and start being more available for questions. And because Mars stations retrograde and in conjuncts his Venus and his Sun pretty tightly, so in the 12th house of secrets, the recluse, confinement, they're saying, Joe, you've got to come out. I think that's what it means. Now, whenever I see two big events like this on one day, I pretty much think that's going to be an eventful day for him. So, look at September 9th for Biden. Assuming I have a good time of birth, I could be off. But anyway, okay, moving on. Now, he has a progression on the 16th of September. Mercury, sesquiquadrate, which I consider mildly beneficial. It's the 135-degree aspect with Saturn. So I think he'll make a speech that is actually pretty beneficial for him. Now, again, we're back to that Mars in conjunct. People are saying, Joe, come out of hiding, 12th house. Okay. Jupiter, sesquiquadrating Uranus. I think there may be some good health news for Joe. Maybe he did his cognitive test or whatever. Jupiter, judgment. Second house, self-esteem. Sesquiquadrate, mildly beneficial. Uranus rules the nervous system. And the 6th house of health. So I think maybe something positive, mildly beneficial will come out about his cognitive. On September 29th, Saturn stations direct and opposes his Jupiter pretty tightly within about 12 minutes, and that's in the 8th house. So will something come out, I don't know, potentially about his family? Jupiter is in his 8th house. Family, could it be about financial corruption? The 8th house, Jupiter in the 8th house. So it could be something like that. It could be death in the family because his Jupiter is in the 8th house of death in Cancer. And so when Saturn stations opposite it, it could be that too. So Saturn comes up to aspect that is when you're held accountable. And I think he'll take some flack for this. He'll take some heat. Jupiter, Mars squaring Jupiter in the 8th. So I think he'll take some negative press about it. October, the month before the election, I'm expecting all sorts of nasty things to be slung out there by both candidates. The dirt will fly. On September 29th is supposed to be the first presidential debate, and Joe has Mars squaring Jupiter. So I don't, I'm not getting a strong read that Joe's going to win that. Okay, the next one's around October 15th. And again, I'm not reading that Joe's going to win that one. Okay, October 4th. Pluto stations direct. Doesn't really do anything very tightly in his chart. So I'm going to give that one a pass. October 9th, Uranus quintiling Saturn. I would expect some really good political news for him October 9th. Now, is this the release of the Dems October surprise? Is this when this comes out? I think it'd be a good one because that's a quintile is considered a lucky, fortunate aspect. So I would suspect it will help Joe. Now moving down to October 14th, I'm not seeing very favorable transits for him in mid-October. mostly in conjuncts. I think maybe Joe has gone back into hiding, back into seclusion, because I'm seeing 3 in conjuncts, which is a lot of separation and rejection. Then let's see, now a couple Mars transits toward the end of, I think again, people are saying, Joe, you got to come out and speak, or maybe it's problems with his children. See how Mars is transiting his 5th house during this period. So it could be problems with his kids. It could be you're not being public. The 5th house is, of course, publicity. So then October 23rd, he seems to come out and, things are looking a whole lot better for him. Maybe the polls are coming in real strong for him. October 24th, this is what, like a week to 10 days before the election. Things are looking real positive for him. Or he's, at least coming out and saying that. Now, October 25th, to me, this is, if Joe were going to step down, he would do it now, right before the election. Why do I say that? Because progressions are very powerful, remember? The moon in the 3rd house of speaking in conjuncts Pluto of power in the 9th house of politics by progression. Is he saying, I'm going to step out for health reasons? Remember I said 2 big transits on the same day tends to be eventful for that person. And Uranus also is going into a 6th house of health. So I could definitely make a case that he may step down suddenly, Uranus, for health reasons toward the end of October. But if he doesn't drop out, I could also make a case that Trump's October surprise comes out at the end of October. I could make a case for that as well. So we'll see. So I think the 2 danger pivot points of Biden dropping out of the race are August 24th and October 25th. So we'll see what happens. Okay, let's take a look at just a quick look at the vice president's charts. I'm not going to do Pence, and I'm not going to do the full-blown Kamala either. I might take a look at what I think will happen with the vice presidential debates, but so let's take a quick look at her chart. So as you can tell right off the bat, this is much more fortunate. This is called a splay pattern. So you see the double grand trine that makes almost like a star pattern. That's called a splay pattern to astrologers, and it's considered a very fortunate placement. You see the trine between the ascendant and the north node, trining Saturn, retrograde, conjunct the midheaven, trining Mercury, conjunct the sun. That's the first grand trine. And that's a little bit troublesome. Grand trine. Why? Because Mercury is combust. Okay, and also Saturn is retrograde, conjunct the midheaven. Now, whenever you have Saturn associated with the midheaven or the 10th, the classic interpretation of that is a fall from grace, someone who rises to power and then loses it, because wherever Saturn is, he will hold you accountable, right? So the classic example is Richard Nixon. Saturn in the 10th, rose to power and found that he loved it so much, and then he got, embroiled in the Watergate scandal, which brought his downfall. So that's the classic interpretation of Saturn associated with the 10th. Now, it is a little bit on the 9th house side, but Saturn did go direct when she was 11. Okay, so about 11-ish. So it says in Wikipedia that's when she moved to Canada, a foreign country, right? 9th house, with her mother, and it looks like things really got better for her there. I think, that was a good move for young Kamala. Now the second grand trine is the moon trining Fortuna, trining Mars. Now, what I found when I'm looking at grand trines is when they are with calculated points, such as, the part of fortune, they tend to be less powerful, of course. But definitely sitting there, would say she has a fortunate marriage, and, chose well that, her, literally her husband is her buddy, the ruler of the 7th in the 11th. However, what I find really fascinating as an astrologer is Kamala has Jupiter conjunct what we would call the malefic star of Algol. Okay, now Algol is given a 6-degree orb because it is considered a very malefic star, right? So she has, a couple degrees with it. So will something come up with her husband that doesn't go well? Now, what I find truly interesting, look here, Kamala's Jupiter falls almost exactly on Trump's midheaven. So these guys were meant to be in this little karmic thing here. They definitely have a connection, and it's no shocker to me that they would square off against one another in a big contest. Now, who's going to win? Who's going to win that contest? Well, let's see how strong Kamala's Jupiter is. Let's go down there and have a look. Well, let's see. Now, for you budding astrologers or astrologer aficionados, what I do is every planet and every sign has a positive and negative manifestation, right? Every planet, even the benefics have a bad side. And the malefics have a bad side and a good side. So whether I'm going to see the positive or negative attributes of that planet or sign manifest depends on how well aspected the planet is. Stress it out. Stress out that planet. Lots of bad aspects. You're going to see the difficult side of that planet manifest. If it's beautifully aspected, you're going to see the nice side of that planet manifest. So let's go down to the grid on Jupiter, and we see an inconjunct, a square, an opposition, a square, and an inconjunct. So I get 6 negative and 2 positive. Now the positives are very wide trines. Her Venus is trine Jupiter by 6, more than 6, and Pluto by more than 8. Some people wouldn't even set that orb that high. So, I'm not getting a strong read on her Jupiter. But if I pull up Trump's chart, his midheaven looks about the same as well. So I don't know who's going to win that contest. If I had to take a quick gander, it looks like she will help him. Jupiter is the greater beneficent and tries to help, right? He's like, protection. And if I look at Kamala's Jupiter squares her natal Saturn. So I wonder if what the cosmos is saying, that Kamala being chosen as the vice president helps Trump's and hurts her. Jupiter squaring Saturn, and Saturn conjunct her midheaven in the 9th house of politics in that grand trine combust. So, I would consider it kind of like, a mixed bag. And that's oftentimes what astrologers get, a mixed bag. And then you've got to weigh things, and you've got to come out with a prediction. And sometimes it's dreadfully difficult because it is kind of 6 of one, half dozen of another. And then you're looking for supporting transits to kind of throw it one way or the other. So anyway, that's a pretty good nutshell of what we astrologers do. And we're wrong sometimes. I'm wrong sometimes. I'll tell you what I see, but honestly, I am wrong sometimes. I get a symbol, and that symbol can rule many things. Okay, moving on. So what we can comfortably say is that she has a much, much, much more fortunate chart than Joe Biden. Grand trines are usually grease the wheels, so her career has probably just fallen in her lap. Look at that big grand trine with Saturn. And I think if I could say something to her, I've got 2 things to say to her. And the first thing I would say to her is, you definitely love power, Pluto conjunct Venus, but beware of putting a toe out of line, because wherever Saturn is, you will be held accountable. So, just be careful not to do things, that you can get caught at, right? Okay. Now, the second difficult thing I see about her chart is that triple conjunction of Uranus, Pluto, and Venus in the 4th house in Virgo. Yikes! That is a really difficult triple conjunction. Okay, we've already talked about Pluto being prevalent in the charts of politicians. Now, Venus is how we relate to people. Okay, put Venus in Virgo and you're picky. All right, you're picky. You demand perfection. Put that conjunct Pluto. You are like, really can be kind of a ball buster about it. I don't know how else to be nice about it. And Uranus will make you erratic. Look at her third house of thinking and speaking. The impulsive Mars is there. And Mars in Leo is the bully. Now Biden has Mars Leo, Trump has Mars Leo, and Kamala has Mars Leo. Are we getting a picture here that you have to be a bit of a bully to be a politician, at least in today's world? Mars is aggressive. We all know that. And this Leo rules the ego, the queen, the king. And when you disagree with them, they take it personally and they fly on the attack. That's, you're not just attacking my ideas, you're attacking me, my ego, and me personally. So that's why if they feel like their ego, their kingship, their queenship is being attacked, they will turn, kind of ugly, right? And I saw her interview Kavanaugh, and I believe that kind of catapulted her to the forefront, because she was pretty rough to the guy. Now, I think in her mind, she went in there like, I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to get him, But as is often the case when you behave that way, and I thought she was kind of vicious and over the top. That was me. As is often the case when you behave that way, overly aggressive, bully, Mars in the third in Leo, it hurts you, right? So it literally says her speaking, right? She's a great speaker, but I think it kind of burns her up. And the second reason I say that is because that triple conjunction in Virgo, Uranus, Pluto, and Venus, opposes Chiron, which is the wound that does not heal in the 10th house. So I think, people saw that and thought, dang, it was a little frightening to think we have someone like that, running the country. So I thought she came off as too formidable. So the second thing I would say to her is be careful, to tone that down, right? She's, I think what I hear is she's unlikable. Now, like as I said earlier, half my family is rabid Republican, half is rabid Democrat. And from what I hear from the rabid Democrats is they were, with bated breath about who Biden was choosing as vice president, because Biden they acknowledge is frail, and that they would be voting for the vice president to be the president. And of the 4 rabid Democrats on, that side of the family, 3 of them backed off when they heard it was Kamala. So she has likability issues, right? And so that would be something I would say she really needs to tone that down and work on her very considerable strengths. So let's take a look at her progressions. Now, when I do this, I just open the ephemeris and I count forward. She's going to be 56 in October. She's almost 56. So I would count 56 days forward. And as I said, progressions, one day shall be as in the life of man. And when planets change sign or station direct or retrograde, change direction in a client's natal chart by progression, it usually signals some pretty good pivot points going on in the client's chart. And sure enough, here we see, you can count down and you see the equivalent in the ephemeris of around December 16th or 17th, roughly. She will be 56. And look at all the stuff going on. She has Mercury changing sign. She has Saturn changing sign, going into Pisces, which is, typically not great for career. And third, she has Pluto stationing retrograde. So, we can tell with 3 planets changing sign and direction on a year that this is going to be a pivotal year for Kamala. Now, if we back up a little bit, we can see that I believe it was around 50-ish or so, maybe a little before, her Mercury went retrograde. Now that's usually, when I have a very mercurial chart. Whenever Mercury goes retrograde, I just have a terrible time. I say things I wish I could take back. And so I think around 50, she probably started saying things she wishes she could take back. So bottom line, I am seeing a much, much, much more favorable chart for Kamala than Biden's. And I'm seeing a bit of a mixed bag here. I'm seeing great gifts and great challenges. And part of the thing we do when we incarnate is we try to overcome our challenges, right? We all have them. And we don't get perfect, and we get to pick between two people. And so, I'll leave that up to you. I'll tell you what I see and then leave it up to you. Now, also interesting is that Uranus is going to station retrograde in her chart. I think she will be 60, 61-ish. 60, 61. Now that's definitely, going to be difficult. I think she may be plagued with sudden issues, potentially health. It's in the health sign of Virgo. Potentially things to do with foreign things, justice. Does she have her feet held to the fire for some justice thing, politics thing? I can definitely see Kamala having a big year, but I'm not sure it's going to continue. And the reason I say that is because her Saturn has retrograded into the sign of Pisces, which dissolves. So to summate, very, very sad, very difficult chart for Biden. I personally would not vote for anybody with a stellium in Scorpio in the 12th house. Yikes, that is some tough stuff to deal with. And I think he's had a tremendously painful incarnation. And I do feel sympathy for the guy, even though, maybe he's not the nicest guy. People born with Pluto square Mars usually aren't the nicest people. Kamala, much more fortunate chart, much greater, gifts and easier incarnation. But she's also got terrible challenges. She's got Jupiter conjunct Caput Algol squaring her Saturn, which has now stationed retrograde into Pisces in her 10th house. Not very good for career. She also has Chiron opposing that triple conjunction in Virgo. Far too picky, far too ballbustery. Needs to work on being a likable person. So guys, quite the long reading. Anyway, if you enjoy these, I hope you will like, share, and subscribe. And thank you for listening.